You ever walk into a room and people just go silent? No one says it out loud, but you can feel the shift. Eyes glance your way. Voices drop. Even the energy changes. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't try to stand out, but somehow you did. People can't quite figure you out. They sense something powerful, but they don't know what to call it. It's not attitude. It's not ego. It's presence. The kind that doesn't need validation. The kind that doesn't play small to make others feel comfortable. So why do certain people feel so intense without even trying? Let's break down 9 signs you have. A strong, quietly intimidating personality, and how Stoic wisdom helps you own it with control, clarity, and purpose. Here's the thing. People throw around the word intimidating like it's a bad thing. But it doesn't mean you're mean. It doesn't mean you're cold. And it definitely doesn't mean you're trying to scare anyone. Sometimes, intimidation is just what happens when someone is deeply grounded. You know what you believe. You don't chase approval. You don't explain yourself just to make others feel okay. But when you don't fully understand that power, you start to question yourself. You misread their discomfort as something wrong with you. This video isn't about being tough for show. It's not about acting strong. It's about recognizing your quiet strength and learning to channel it like a true Stoic, not for dominance, but for impact. Because the most powerful people are rarely the loudest in the room. They're the most anchored. Let's dive in. 1. Trade. Have you ever noticed how often people agree just to avoid tension in a group discussion? At a dinner table. In a team meeting, most people will nod along, even when they don't fully agree, not because they believe it, but because silence feels safer than truth, because blending in feels easier than standing out. But you don't do that. You don't agree just to keep the room comfortable. You don't co-sign nonsense just to protect someone's ego. You think for yourself, and you speak. When something doesn't sit right, you ask questions. You point out inconsistencies. You look for logic where others just want approval. And that alone can change the entire dynamic of a room. Let's say you're in a meeting. The team is buzzing with excitement. They're talking fast, nodding in sync, echoing each other's opinions. And then, you raise your hand. You say something like, "Have we thought about the downside risk here?" Or, "Are we sure the numbers support that?" And just like that, the air changes. People shift in their seats. The tension rises. Some appreciate the clarity. Others, not so much. Because what you just did wasn't rude. It wasn't aggressive. It was honest. But honesty, especially when it's calm and razor-sharp, can feel threatening to people who live in the comfort of unchallenged ideas. Here's the paradox. People say they want truth. But when they're faced with someone who truly lives by it, they often push back or pull away. Why? Because your independence makes them reflect on their dependence. Your clarity makes them question their confusion. And your logic forces them to confront emotions they've spent years avoiding. You're not being mean. You're being precise. But precision, in a world of polite fiction, can feel like an earthquake. And yet, you don't change. Because for you, truth matters more than harmony. Clarity matters more than approval. Marcus Aurelius captured it perfectly. If someone can show me that what I think or do is not right, I will happily change, for I seek the truth, which never harmed anyone. That's the difference between a person who debates for ego and a Stoic who questions to evolve. You're not trying to win. You're trying to understand. You're not playing chess with people's feelings. You're following reason wherever it leads, even if that road is lonely. And yes, there's a cost. People will call you difficult. They'll say, you're too intense, too much, or not a team player. But what they're really saying is, I'm not ready for that level of honesty. And that's not your problem to fix. Still, there's a balance. Stoicism doesn't glorify being harsh or condescending. It teaches that the goal of reason is growth, not domination. So when you speak your truth, do it not with the blade of arrogance, but with the hand of clarity. You don't have to silence others. You don't have to win the room. You just have to stay grounded in what's real and speak from that place. Because in a world full of noise, your calm logic is power. It's intimidating not because it's loud, but because it's anchored. You're not reacting, you're responding. You're not posturing, you're aligning with principle. And people feel that even if they can't explain it, even if they don't always like it, and that's okay. Because independent thinking, the kind rooted in truth and guided by discipline, will always feel disruptive to those who've never questioned their own patterns. That's not your burden to carry. It's your gift to protect. So no, you don't blend in. You never will. And that's exactly what makes you strong. 2. You don't seek applause, you seek alignment. We live in a world obsessed with approval. Thumbs up, claps, retweets, hearts. A sea of validation designed to keep us addicted to being liked. But you're different. You don't wake up every day wondering, how can I get more applause? You wake up asking, am I doing what feels aligned with who I really am? You move through life with a quiet self-assurance. Not because you think you're better than others, but because you no longer need their permission to be yourself. You do what's right, not what's popular, not what's trendy, and definitely not what earns the most applause. And that makes people uncomfortable. Because when someone stops needing external validation, they become impossible to manipulate. Imagine this. Your friends are planning a weekend getaway. Everyone's excited. You've been invited. But deep down, you know it doesn't align with what you need right now. Maybe you're working on a project. Maybe your energy is low. Maybe you just need space. So you say no politely, but firmly, and the room gets weird. Someone says, come on, live a little. Another teases you for being too serious or no fun. But you don't flinch. You don't over-explain. You don't bend to make them feel better. You're not rude. You're just clear. And that clarity, it intimidates people. Why? Because most people can't say no without guilt. Most people don't know who they are without applause. Most people are so used to bending for others. They don't know what it feels like to stand firm in themselves. But you've been through that. You've outgrown the need to be validated. You've learned that living for approval is just a slow way to die inside. That's what makes you mentally strong. And yes, mentally intimidating. Stoic philosophy teaches that freedom doesn't come from having control over others. It comes from having control over your own desires. and perhaps the deepest desire to master is the desire to be liked. When you release that, you become dangerous in the best way. People can't guilt you. They can't pressure you. They can't make you feel less than just because you choose something different. That doesn't mean you're cold. It means you're whole. But here's the twist. Many people will misread your self-trust as arrogance. They'll say things like, "You think you're too good," or "You don't care about anyone else." But what they're really saying is, "I don't know how to exist without needing to be accepted, and you remind me of that, and that's not your job to fix. You're not here to play small so others don't feel insecure. You're here to live in alignment, to move in a way that's true to your values, your goals, and your peace." Now, let's be clear. You're not closed off. You're not indifferent. You're just selective. You set boundaries. You say no when it matters. You protect your time, your space, and your mind. And that's not selfish, that's self-respect. Epictetus, one of the great Stoics, said, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." Translation, you have to be okay with disappointing people if it means not disappointing yourself. So, what does this look like in real life? It's politely declining invitations without apologizing. It's taking a break from social media without announcing it. It's making decisions based on your inner compass, not the latest trend or public opinion. It's saying, "I don't need applause. I need peace." Because you understand something most don't. Validation fades. Claps stop. Trends pass. But alignment, that's forever. So if people call you distant, cold, hard to read, let them. Because when you no longer need to be understood in order to be yourself, you've reached a level of strength most people never touch. And that's not just intimidating, that's unshakable. There's something powerful, almost unsettling, about a person who doesn't bend, not out of stubbornness, not out of ego, but because they've built a life around principles instead of preferences. You don't chase what's convenient. You don't trade your values for comfort. And you definitely don't shapeshift to fit the crowd. You live by your own internal compass quietly, consistently, and unapologetically, and that makes people nervous. Why? Because most people don't live that way. They adjust themselves to avoid friction. They smile when they want to speak up. They stay silent in rooms where their voice could have mattered. Not because they don't have convictions, but because they're afraid of the cost. You, on the other hand, pay the cost up front. You'd rather be misunderstood for staying true than liked for being a watered-down version of yourself. You don't perform integrity. You practice it daily, privately, without applause. That's what makes you mentally intimidating, because your mere presence reminds people of the corners they've cut in their own lives. And no one likes to be reminded of that. Imagine a situation at work. Your team is under pressure. Someone suggests manipulating data slightly to make results look better for a client. It's subtle. It's not a big deal. And almost everyone nods. Except you. You don't lash out. You don't make a scene. You simply say, "I'm not comfortable with that." It compromises the integrity of the work. The room goes quiet. Suddenly, that tiny shift you refuse to make That small stand becomes a spotlight. Others begin to feel the weight of what they just agreed to, not because you shamed them, but because you didn't follow. That's what principle does. It doesn't scream. It doesn't judge. It simply refuses to move when the world expects it to sway. Epictetus, the great Stoic teacher, once said, "Don't explain your philosophy. Embody it." And you do. You don't need to lecture anyone. You don't post quotes to prove your virtue. You live your values in how you show up, how you speak, how you choose. You become the kind of person whose actions speak louder than opinions. But make no mistake, this strength can feel isolating. You may find yourself outside of certain circles. You might be labeled rigid, too serious, or self-righteous. But you're none of those things. You're simply not willing to betray your own soul just to keep others comfortable. And that kind of self-loyalty, that's rare. It takes courage to walk the higher road when the lower path is full of applause. It takes restraint to hold your ground when compromise would buy you comfort. And it takes deep self-respect to choose truth over tactics in a world addicted to convenience. So, how do you maintain this strength without turning it into pride? The key is quiet consistency. Live your values. Don't broadcast them. Let your integrity be felt, not flaunted. When someone crosses a boundary, you don't explode. You clarify. When faced with a shortcut, you don't judge others for taking it. You just keep walking your own path. Because Stoicism teaches us, virtue isn't about looking good. It's about being good, especially when no one's watching. And people will feel that. They might not know how to name it, but they'll feel it. And some will respect you more because of it. Others will avoid you because standing next to you makes them see what they've compromised in themselves. Let them. You're not here to make others feel okay about breaking their word. You're here to keep yours no matter what. So, no, you don't follow trends. You don't shift with the crowd. You don't bend just to blend in. Because you understand something most people don't. A principle only has power if you keep it when it's hard to. And yours. They're not for sale. Forger. Some people panic at the thought of being alone. They fill their calendars with events. Noise. People, anything to keep the silence out. You're not like that. You don't run from solitude. You walk straight into it. Like a monk in training. Like a warrior sharpening his blade in the quiet. Where others feel lost in silence, you feel centered. You don't need a crowd to feel worthy. You don't need external noise to feel alive. You've discovered something rare. Stillness isn't a void, it's a sanctuary. That's intimidating to people, because most don't know who they are without someone else reflecting them back. They define themselves by their social life, their likes, their DMs, their constant engagement with the outside world. But you've chosen a different path. You spend time alone, not because you're antisocial, but because you're intentional. You've realized that being alone is often when the real work happens. You reflect, you observe, you grow. You ask hard questions and wait patiently for the answers to surface. It's not easy. Solitude forces you to face your thoughts with no distraction, no performance, no applause. And that kind of honesty, it creates power, quiet power. Imagine someone invites you out, the group's going drinking, loud music, the usual energy. But you decline, not with attitude, not because you dislike them, but because you've chosen to stay home, read, learn, rest, or simply be. And the truth, you don't feel like you're missing anything, because you're full already. That's when it happens, people start to project. They might say, "You're so distant," or "You think you're better than everyone." But what they really mean is, "I don't know how to be okay without constant validation," and you clearly do. That scares them. Your comfort in solitude makes you hard to control, because you're not chasing inclusion. You're not driven by FOMO. You don't make decisions from a place of emptiness. And that's rare. And yes, intimidating. Stoic philosophy embraces solitude. The great minds, Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca, all wrote in silence. They journaled, walked alone, practiced negative visualization, imagining loss to cultivate gratitude and resilience. They knew that time alone wasn't a punishment. It was training, and you've discovered the same truth. When you walk without music, you notice the rhythm of your thoughts. When you journal your fears, you strip them of their power. When you visualize losing what you love, you begin to love more deeply, more presently. That kind of inner discipline creates an energy that can't be faked. You become the person who doesn't fold under pressure because you've already faced yourself, and others feel that, even if they don't understand it, in social settings, you may not be the loudest, but your presence carries weight. You speak less, but with intention. You connect deeply, not casually, and because you don't need anyone. People often want your presence more. But here's the cost. You may lose certain connections. Some friends may fade. Some people may say, "You've changed." And you have. You've chosen depth over distraction, substance over noise, solitude over social validation. Not because you're lacking something, but because you've already found it. In yourself, in the silence, in the stillness, where most people refuse to go. That's the irony. You're not lonely. They are. Even when they're surrounded, you don't fear being alone. Because you've realized, when you're fully grounded in yourself, you're never truly alone. And that kind of peace, it can't be faked. It can't be bought. And it sure as hell can't be manipulated. So if people call you distant, cold, hard to read, let them. You've trained in silence. You've become strong there. And while others are out chasing approval, you've mastered the art of being your own anchor. That doesn't make you detached. It makes you dangerous in the best, most stoic way possible. Most people dodge discomfort. They lie by omission, sugarcoat the truth, or stay silent just to keep things nice. But you're not like that. You don't circle around what needs to be said. You don't let unresolved tension fester, and you don't protect feelings at the expense of truth. You speak not to hurt, not to control, but to clarify, because you know something most avoid. Hard conversations are where real growth happens. You're the one in the room who says, "Hey, I noticed something, and we should talk about it." And that sentence alone, it makes people freeze. Not because you're aggressive, but because you're honest, and that level of honesty is rare. Imagine this. A friend has been pushing boundaries. They've been taking your silence for agreement, your patience for passivity, your space for submission. Maybe they borrow without asking. Maybe they keep joking at your expense. Maybe they make plans that affect you without checking in. Most people would avoid the tension. They'd bury it. They'd vent to someone else. Or they'd slowly pull away without explanation. But you sit down and say, "Listen, I value our connection, but I need to talk to you about something that's been bothering me." You're calm. You're clear. You're composed. You're not blaming. You're just holding up a mirror. And that mirror, it's uncomfortable because it forces people to look at their behavior, and not everyone's ready for that. But you don't avoid the truth just because it's inconvenient. You say what needs to be said, even when your voice shakes. That's a mark of real inner strength. And yes, it's intimidating. Stoic philosophy teaches us to separate the person from the problem. You don't attack. You address. You don't label someone as bad. You point out what crossed a line. It's the difference between confrontation and connection. You don't seek drama. You seek resolution. And people who aren't used to that kind of directness, they often mistake it for aggression. They say things like, "You're too intense," or "You always make things serious." But you're not being serious. You're being real. Because letting resentment build up just to keep the peace isn't peace, it's silent warfare. You'd rather risk an awkward moment than pretend everything's fine when it's not. That doesn't mean you're rude. It means you respect both yourself and the relationship enough to have the hard talk. That takes courage. And like most forms of courage, it's uncomfortable to watch when you're used to hiding. So, yes, when you ask tough questions, it catches people off guard. Questions like, "Why do you keep canceling last minute? Is this really a joke? Or are you trying to say something else? Did you assume I'd be okay with that? Or did you just not ask?" These aren't attacks. They're clarifications. And clarification clears the fog, even if it burns a little on the way. You don't ask to provoke. You ask to bring truth to the surface. Because in your world, silence is not safety. It's delay. And delay costs relationships, respect, and self-worth. So you speak with calm, with clarity, with intention, and whether people can handle that or not, you never regret choosing truth over tension. You're not cold. You're not insensitive. You're simply unwilling to betray your own discomfort just to make someone else more comfortable. And the truth is, people may not like it in the moment, but over time they remember you as someone who was fair, someone who was honest, someone who didn't let resentment replace connection. That's Stoic courage. Not shouting, not blaming, just standing in your truth firm and still. Because the ability to have hard conversations without hostility is one of the rarest forms of strength. So the next time someone says, "You're too direct," just smile. Because what they're really saying is, "I'm not used to someone who won't lie to keep things easy." And that's not your problem. It's your power. Some people enter a room and fade into the noise. Others shift the entire energy without making a sound. You know which one you are. You don't need to speak loudly. Wave your hands or seek the spotlight. Your presence alone is enough to make people adjust how they sit, how they talk, how they carry themselves. They notice you. Not because you're demanding attention, but because you're anchored. There's something about you, something composed, still, self-contained. You walk in quietly, and suddenly the vibe isn't quite the same. Not colder, just clearer. People get a little more aware. They sit straighter. They choose their words more carefully. The joking softens. The tone changes. It's not fear. It's not awe. It's respect. The kind that isn't spoken, but felt, and you didn't try to make it happen. You don't chase that effect. It follows you because of how you carry yourself. That's energetic gravity. It's the quiet force of someone who's disciplined, someone who knows who they are, someone who doesn't need the room to shrink just to feel big. You're not competing. You're not comparing. You're simply there, fully. And in a world where most people are disconnected from themselves, being around someone that's centered can feel unsettling. Not because you're doing anything wrong, but because your focus, your stillness, your clarity exposes how scattered everyone else feels. People don't say it out loud, but around you, they sense they can't get away with fluff. Their usual distractions don't quite work. Their passive-aggressive jokes fall flat. Their social masks feel heavy. Your presence demands authenticity without ever asking for it. That's intimidating, because most people spend their lives avoiding that level of self-awareness, and you walk in with it like it's your second skin. Stoic philosophy taught this long before it was trendy. Marcus Aurelius said, "Be silent most of the time, or speak only what is necessary, and in few words." Why? Because silence holds power, because restraint reveals depth, because people who speak less often speak better. You've mastered that. You listen more than you talk. You observe before you react. You don't fill every silence, you use it. And in doing so, you create a field around you, a quiet gravitational pull that others feel the moment they step near you. This isn't about being intimidating for the sake of it. It's about being centered in a world that's constantly spinning, and the result, you become someone others look to when things feel chaotic. They may not always admit it, but your energy makes people feel like there's finally an adult in the room. But make no mistake, that kind of presence comes with weight. Some people will avoid it. They'll say, "You're too intense, too serious, or hard to read." What they're really saying is, "You make me feel exposed," and that's okay, because you're not here to entertain. You're here to embody something deeper: self-discipline, awareness, respect both for yourself and those around you. You don't soften your voice to gain approval. You don't shrink your presence to make others more comfortable, but you do temper it with kindness. You balance stillness with warmth. You use your power to create space for honesty, not fear. That's the difference between being intimidating and being anchored. You don't walk into the room to control it. You walk in already in control of yourself. And people feel that. So if you've ever wondered why rooms shift when you walk in, why conversations become more careful, why some people admire you from a distance but hesitate to get close, it's not because you're doing too much. It's because you've done the work. You've cultivated an energy that doesn't shout but speaks louder than words ever could. And in a world full of noise, that kind of quiet power is unforgettable. You don't speak to fill silence. You speak to shift something. In a world addicted to noise, where people talk just to be heard, where conversations are filled with empty takes, forced laughter, and shallow small talk, you stay quiet. Not because you don't have something to say, but because you understand the value of timing. Your words carry weight precisely because they're not thrown around casually. You choose them. You wait. And when you finally speak, people pause. They lean in. They listen differently. Because something about the way you speak signals that what you're about to say matters. You don't perform wisdom. You practice restraint. You're not loud. You're intentional. And in a world of constant chatter that makes your voice feel like thunder, but here's the irony. This can make people feel unsettled. Not because you're trying to be intimidating, but because most people aren't used to meaningful silence. They're used to fast replies, surface-level yokes, nervous over-talking. And when you don't follow that rhythm, it breaks their pattern. It exposes their habits, their need to be heard, to be liked, to be validated through volume. You don't need that. You're grounded in something deeper: presence. Sometimes you speak only one sentence in a meeting, and it's the one thing everyone remembers. Sometimes you share a thought in a group of friends, and it lingers longer than the entire conversation. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't dominate the dialogue. But your words cut through the noise because they were measured, true, and delivered with calm clarity. That's power, and it comes from a practice the Stoics understood intimately: mastery over speech. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The wise man speaks little and only when necessary." For his words, though few, carry great meaning. Seneca said, "Speech, if it is to be useful, should be carefully measured, not thrown like arrows in the dark." You've taken that to heart. You understand that it's not just what you say. It's how, when, and why you say it. Let's break it down. The strategic use of silence. You don't rush to respond. You allow space between stimulus and reaction. That space, it builds tension. It gives others time to reflect. And it shows that you don't need to rush truth into the room, because truth is patient. The pause as a tool. You let a moment breathe. Before you reply, you pause just long enough for people to really feel the shift. That microsecond of silence before you speak, it holds more gravity than most people's entire sentence. Eye contact as presence when you talk. You look people in the eye, not to dominate, but to connect, to let them know, I'm not just saying this, I mean this. Your gaze carries as much weight as your words, and people feel it in their bones. But this precision comes at a cost. Some people feel awkward around you. They say things like, "You're hard to read," or "I never know what you're thinking," because they're not used to depth. They're used to instant responses, filler words, and emotional reassurance. You don't give them that. You give them something real, and not everyone's ready for that kind of presence. But here's the secret. You're not here to flood the room with words. You're here to anchor the space with meaning. And when you speak, you're not trying to impress. You're not trying to win the conversation. You're offering something useful, something clarifying, something worth remembering. That's why your words echo, not because they're loud, but because they're true. So, if people hesitate before responding to you, If they pause longer than usual after you speak, don't mistake that for discomfort. It's not confusion. It's respect. It's the mental shift you caused by speaking with purpose instead of impulse. Because your words aren't cheap. They're currency. And when used wisely, they buy clarity, influence, and trust. In the end, you've mastered what most people avoid, saying less, but meaning more. You've spent enough of your life second-guessing yourself, waiting for someone to tell you, it's okay. You're allowed to choose. You've stood in too many rooms where your silence was mistaken for agreement, your hesitation used against you, and your kindness exploited by people who feared your voice because they knew once you decided they'd lose control. But not anymore. Now, when others stall in fear, you move. You don't need a crowd to validate your logic. You don't need a group chat to approve your instinct. You decide, not out of ego, but from a place of deep, unshakable clarity. And that clarity, it rattles people, because they're still living in mental chaos, still dependent on someone else's confidence, still terrified of being blamed if they're wrong. But you've already lived through indecision. You've already paid the price of not choosing, the regret, the self-doubt, the silent nights where you knew you should have spoken, acted, walked away. That version of you is gone. Now, when your gut speaks, you listen. When the facts are clear, you move. When the moment calls for a leader, you don't wait to be picked. You step forward, not because you want control, but because you refuse to be controlled again. That scares people. They'll say you're too direct, that you move too fast, that you make others feel small. But what they're really saying is, I don't know how to function around someone who doesn't need permission, and that's not your responsibility to manage. You've earned your decisiveness through fire, through disappointment, through all the moments when you stayed quiet and it almost broke you. Now, you speak. You act. You walk away when something violates your peace, and you do it without guilt. That is Stoic power, refined through restraint, hardened through principle, tempered by pain. The Stoics never chased approval. They stripped life down to its core. What can I control? What aligns with virtue? What must I do regardless of how it's received? You carry that same logic. You don't overthink. You don't explain endlessly. You don't apologize for being efficient. And yet you do it without arrogance. Because your strength isn't loud. It's preciser. You've learned to pair decisiveness with emotional intelligence. You speak with calm tone, but your decisions land like steel. You ask for input, but you're not afraid to lead. You hear others, but you don't hand them the steering wheel to your own life. This balance, it's rare, and it will shake the core of anyone who's spent their life manipulating indecisive minds. So let them misunderstand you. Let them call you distant, controlling, intense. Because deep down they know what you are. You're the person who cannot be hijacked, cannot be delayed, cannot be emotionally blackmailed. You've taken back your time, your voice, your agency. And when you say, "This is what I've decided," the room gets quiet, because they realize they're no longer dealing with someone who can be talked out of their own knowing. Remember this, decisiveness is not dominance. It's healing. It's reclaiming. It's how you rise from being used to being unshakable. You don't need people to understand you anymore. Not because you've given up on connection, but because you've outgrown the need to explain yourself to those who aren't even listening. You're no longer performing clarity for people who are still committed to confusion. You're not looking for sympathy. You're looking for alignment with yourself, with your values, with your vision, with what you know deep in your bones is right. And that unsettles people, because most people are still searching for permission to be who they are, still calibrating their truth to the opinions of others, still adjusting their identity to fit into whatever room they're standing in. But you've stopped doing that. You've chosen something rarer, something quieter, something infinitely stronger, self-respect through internal alignment. You no longer bend just to be relatable. You no longer soften your edges to be digestible. You don't speak in disclaimers. You don't beg to be seen. You see yourself, and that's enough. That's what makes you mentally intimidating, because people can't place you. They can't label you. They can't manipulate you using their favorite tactic, guilt. You don't respond to guilt anymore. You respond to truth. And that makes people who are still dependent on external approval deeply uncomfortable. They don't know what to do with someone who doesn't flinch when misunderstood, who doesn't chase the crowd to feel right, who doesn't twist themselves just to avoid rejection. But you've realized something powerful. Being understood by others means nothing if it requires abandoning who you actually are. You've stopped explaining yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You've stopped trying to be the version of you that others feel safe with. Now you move in silence. Now you say less, but feel more. Now you live so rooted in your truth that people don't know whether to admire you or fear you. That's the beauty of alignment. It's not loud. It's not dramatic. But it is undeniable. And yes, your clarity makes the uncertain feel exposed. Unapologetically aligned people make uncertain people uncomfortable, because you remind them of everything they've compromised, every truth they've diluted, every instinct they've buried just to be accepted. But here's the thing, you didn't become this way overnight. You became this way after years of being misunderstood, of explaining yourself to people who didn't care, of censoring your own voice just to be palatable to the ones who never earned your authenticity. And now, you don't need to be decoded. You'd rather be misjudged and authentic than applauded for being fake. You're not hard to understand. You're just not performing anymore. You're clear with yourself. And clarity with self is louder than any performance for others. People might call you distant, cold, detached, hard to read. Let them. What they're really saying is, I can't figure out how to control you, and it scares me, because you no longer shrink yourself just to be accessible. You no longer hand out your truth just to be invited in. You've made peace with being misunderstood, and that peace has made you untouchable. Because your mystery, it's not a mask. It's not manipulation. It's protection. Your unreadability is not a weapon. It's a shield. A shield forged in truth, clarity, and an unshakable decision to no longer betray yourself just to be loved by people who don't even love themselves. So no, you're not trying to be understood. You're trying to be aligned, and that makes you rare. That makes you dangerous. That makes you free. 12:00, 13:00. Conclusion: your power isn't the problem. If people feel pressure around you, if they say you're intense, hard to read, or too much. It's not because you're doing something wrong. It's because your presence reflects what they've been avoiding. Your calm reveals their chaos. Your focus highlights their distraction. Your truth calls out their performance. And that reflection, it shakes them. Not because you demand power, but because you carry it without needing to explain it. You don't raise your voice. You don't seek the spotlight. You don't force your strength onto anyone. You simply embody it. And that embodiment is louder than any speech. It doesn't overpower it, unmasks. That's why some people pull away. Not because of who you are, but because they don't know how to stand next to someone who isn't constantly seeking approval. But don't let that make you smaller. Don't dilute your strength just to make others more comfortable. Your power is not a weapon, it's a foundation. A foundation that was built through pain, refined through restraint, and solidified through silence. So use it wisely. Use it to uplift, to protect, to lead without demanding. Because in a world of noise, your quiet power is revolutionary. If this message resonated with you, drop a comment below and say, "I'd rather be respected in silence than applauded in noise." Let the world know you're done chasing approval and you're committed to alignment. And if you want more insights like this, more lessons on how to master your emotions, control your inner world, and build unshakable presence through Stoic wisdom, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because the journey to mental clarity starts with learning to stand still in your own truth. See you in the next one.